Hi, everyone. It's Ashley. Thank you so much for joining me today for the next part in our series on cultivating classroom community and culture through literature. Today, we're going to be focusing on cultivating empathy through picture books. And this is an interactive read aloud planning session geared towards the middle grades, grades 6 through 8th. As a reminder, this webinar series is brought to you through the Greeley Center for Catholic Education at Loyola University in Chicago. Please check out the Greeley website for great free educator resources, including a one-pager that accompanies each of the webinars in this series. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to connect about great picture books geared towards middle school students. It is a total misconception that middle schoolers are too old for picture books. There are some wonderful picture books that are really appropriate for the middle grades and that students are really, really engaged in. Even middle school students love being read aloud to. So a few that I want to feature are Your Move by Eve Bunting, which is about a middle school boy who is feeling pressure to join a gang in his community. However, he is having an internal conflict because he also wants to be a really good role model to his little brother who looks up to him. I've read that book many, many times to middle schoolers, and it used to be one of my students' very favorite picture books. So I would definitely check that out. It deals with really important themes. Everything in Its Place is another really, really great picture book that's appropriate for middle school students. It's about a young girl who doesn't feel like she quite belongs anywhere. And she's hanging out at her mom's diner and sees this awesome group of women who are all each unique and different, but they all belong to this motorcycle gang together. And she learns the lesson that you don't need to be the same as everyone in order to find your place, in order to belong. Another great book is My Two Border Towns, about a little boy who lives on the Mexico-US border. And it's about how he navigates going between these two different communities in these two towns. So I really encourage you to check these out and check out other great picture books that might be appropriate for your middle school students. You can check out leeandlow.com, which is a great diverse publishing company, and diversebooks.org. We Need Diverse Books is another great organization that features the newest, best diverse books. So the work that we're going to be doing today builds upon the learning done in the first two webinars. So we're going to take a moment to refresh our memories. In our first webinar, we discussed the problem that there are not enough diverse books in our classroom libraries, and there are not enough diverse books being published in our country. So we also discussed the importance that of having mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors in our classroom libraries. That phrase and this philosophy was coined by Rudine Sims Bishop in 1990. And we discussed how students need mirrors, which are texts that reflect one or more aspects of a student's identity or experience, and how students also need windows, which are stories that offer insight into someone else's experience or world. And how having both types of text in our classroom libraries can help to cultivate a better classroom climate and create more empathic, tolerant people. In our second webinar, we talked about we tried to answer the essential question of, once we do diversify our classroom library, how might we teach and interact with these texts in a way that's meaningful for our students? And one way we can do that is through the interactive read aloud, which is a structure of teaching books to your students, right? And it is a sacred time when teacher pulls students together to share a text. It's super short, 15 to 20 minutes max. And it's when teachers model thinking aloud a reading strategy and then ask students to practice it. So this is a great tool to teach any reading skill or strategy, including SEL skills and strategies like building empathy for people different from ourselves. So today, for this session, the essential question is how can we plan an interactive read aloud that cultivates empathy for people different from ourselves? So some buzzwords are empathy, that which we know is the ability to understand and share the feeling of others. And a window that we just discussed is a text that offers insight into someone else's experience or world. We know that it's equally as important to have mirrors in our classroom library, but for the purpose of planning interactive read alouds, we're going to focus on windows. So texts that offer insight into someone else's culture or experience, um, in hopes that pushing students to empathize with people different from themselves will help to really build their muscles for interacting and being more tolerant of people who are different from themselves. Okay, so it would be great if we could just take a moment to get organized. You might want to download the interactive read aloud lesson planning template. It's found on the Greeley Center website under creating a classroom culture through literacy. So this will really help you when doing this collaborative planning work together that we're about to do. It will help to guide you through it. If you had trouble locating it, here's an image of it just to refresh your memory. It follows the structure of the interactive read aloud. So it walks you through the book introduction, the first and second, the first teacher think aloud, the first student practice, and then the second teacher think aloud, the second student practice, and then reminds you obviously to craft those big questions, those discussion questions at the end of the interactive read aloud. Okay, so let's get started answering the question of how do we plan an interactive read aloud that cultivates empathy for people different from our students, okay? So here are four of the main steps. The first is you want to choose a story that features diverse characters, settings, or problems, and one that serves as a window for your students. It's really important to remember that a text that we consider to be a window is different for each classroom, depending on your student population, right? One text might serve as a mirror for many of your students in your classroom. It might be a window in a different classroom with a different student population. So the texts that we're featuring are potential windows for students, okay? We might look at them and be like, well, that actually is a mirror for my students, and that's fine. You have to obviously know your own students to find a perfect window to teach with. The second step is to read the text through the lens. Which parts are emotionally heightened and might be good opportunities for students to practice standing in the shoes of the character? And you want to mark those parts down. We know that the moments that we find to be the most moving in stories are often the moments that students will also find to be the most emotionally moving and respond to. So you want to mark those down. I always remind teachers, read the book for enjoyment before you read the text through that lens. You want to make sure that you really love the story before you teach it to your class. If you don't love the story, your students probably won't either. Step 3, once you read through that specific lens, is you want to determine which empathizing strategies might be most fitting to teach at those specific parts. And then you want to plan your model think aloud, your turn and talk setups and discussion questions using the planning template to help you. So we're going to walk through this planning process together. And I want you to pretend that we're just sitting in the teacher's lounge and we're having this planning session together, planning an interactive read aloud in hopes of cultivating empathy in our students for people different from themselves, okay? So we know step 1 is we want to choose a story that features diverse characters, settings, or problems, one that serves as a window for your students. The one I'm going to focus on today is Watercress by Andrea Wang. And it's one of my very favorite books right now. I think it's really appropriate for middle school students. It has very advanced vocabulary. It has mature concepts and ideas. It has interesting literary techniques. So it's definitely appropriate for middle school students. Because you don't have the text in front of you, and because I can't read the whole book to you over screen, I don't know how engaging that would be, I am going to give you a quick summary. So Watercress is about a little girl, a young girl, who is driving with her brother and parents, who are Chinese immigrants and they're driving in Ohio, in rural Ohio. And they pull over to the side of the road abruptly, and her parents get really excited and ask their children to get out of the car with them. They hand them scissors and brown paper bags, and they say, like, come with us. Let's collect this plant. It's called watercress. Okay. And the narrator and her young brother are confused by this, and they think that watercress is disgusting, that it's covered in mud and snails, and they reluctantly do it though. And then when they get home, the narrator's mother serves watercress for dinner, and the narrator is like, I don't want this. This is gross. I want store-bought food. And the mother then quietly brings out a picture of her and her parents and her brother growing up in China, and explains that during the famine when she was growing up, they had nothing to eat. They had very little to eat, and her brother passed away because he didn't have enough to eat. And the daughter then realizes that this watercress is symbolic of way more than just a plant, but it symbolizes her parents' connection to China, and also how fortunate they feel to have food on their table. And she learns to really appreciate her family's heritage and where they came from. And the reason I love this book is that I think it provides a great window for students into the lives of children who are growing up with first-generation immigrants to the United States, and the struggles that they might experience, and also like the beautiful moments and beautiful traditions that they also experience and come from. Okay, so step 2, once we pick a text that we think serves as a great window, we want to read the text through the lens. Which parts are emotionally heightened and might be good opportunities for students to practice standing in the shoes of the character, which I've done, and I'll share those with you in just a moment. And then step 3, we know, is to determine which empathizing strategies might be most fitting to teach at those parts, okay, which I've also done. So we've identified the book. We've identified emotionally heightened parts of the story and determined empathizing strategies. And now I'm going to show you how I really plan the first teacher model, the second student stopping point, and then you're going to have a chance to continue planning with this. As always, use the lesson planning template. It's a really helpful tool. Even years after teaching the interactive read aloud, I still use it to plan out my own lessons. It will really walk you through this. Okay, so for the first stopping point, I chose to focus on this page. It was like the third page in the story. And I'll read it to you. They haul us out of the back seat, and we are told to untie our sneakers, peel off our socks, and roll up our jeans. We have to help them gather it. So I'm going to show you what I would say to the students, okay? So I might say, okay, readers, I'm going to stop here. And we're going to practice empathizing with the narrator by asking, if I were in the character's shoes, what would I be thinking right now? And I want you to watch me do this, okay? So if I were in the character's shoes, in the narrator's shoes, I might be thinking, this is really weird. Why did my parents pull over to the side of a road and ask me to gather weeds? Probably think it's really strange, okay? I might even think it's a little annoying. Why do we have to go through this muddy area that's covered in snails and gather this plant? Okay. So did you notice how I practiced empathizing with the character by asking, what would I be thinking right now? Okay. I would probably be thinking, this is strange. This is weird. This is even kind of annoying. Okay. You're going to have a chance to empathize with the narrator next, okay? All right, so do you see how I did that? I found an emotionally heightened part. I chose an empathizing strategy that I think would work, and then I modeled thinking it aloud for my students, okay? So for the next student practice, the next stopping point, we know is a student practice, where they're going to practice the same skill and strategy with a different part of the story. So this is the part that I picked, okay? A car passes by and I duck my head, hoping that no one notices. Hoping no one notices. So I chose this part. You can see I even have an I like this. My post-it note, my digital post-it note still on there because I thought it was so emotionally heightened. So right now, I would probably say this to my students, okay? Okay, now it's your turn to practice turning and talking and empathizing with the narrator. And I want you to practice empathizing by asking, if I were in the character's shoes, what would I be thinking right now? What would I be thinking right now? And I want you to put your thumb up and you have something to say. Once I've noticed that enough students have their thumbs up, I would have them turn and talk with their partner, practice empathizing with the character, okay? All right, now you are going to have a chance to craft the teacher think aloud number 2 and the student practice number 2. Okay. Now I picked for you 2 other pages in the story, the next 2 stopping points. Okay. And I'll read them to you. And then you can go off and do this planning work. So the first page that you're going to interact with for the teacher think aloud number 2 is when they are seated at the dinner table. On the dinner table that night, a dish of watercress glistening with garlicky oil and freckled with sesame seeds. The mud and the snails are long gone, but I still don't want to eat it, any of it. I only want to eat vegetables from the grocery store. Okay, then a few pages go by, and it's where the mother shows the narrator the picture and tells a story of the famine. Okay, and then here's this page. I look from my uncle's hollow face to the watercress on the table, and I am ashamed of being ashamed of my family. Okay. So I want you to think now, which same strategy would be powerful to teach at both of these stopping points? What would you say or do during the think aloud on the first page? And how would you set students up to practice turn and talking on the second page? Okay. Refer to the lesson plan template to help guide you, and feel free to obviously pause this. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful in planning out your own teacher model and student practice. And then we know that we plan discussion questions, okay? So I planned 2 of them, just for examples. I always like to at least have one discussion question that relates back to the skill or strategy being taught. So in this case, it's empathizing with characters. So the first question is, empathy is the ability to feel what another person feels. Which point in the story were you able to experience the most empathy for the narrator? In other words, during which parts were you able to feel what she was feeling? Embarrassed, confused, ashamed? And then I often like using having a question about author's craft. And so there's a really powerful flashback in here where the mother is telling the story of her brother during the famine. So I wrote, where did the author include a flashback? And why do you think she chose to include it? I want you now to try crafting a discussion question. Again, it might relate to still building the muscle of empathizing with characters, or it might have to do with author's craft, character development, setting, whatever you think is a juicy question that will get your students talking. Okay, so feel free to pause this. Okay, so together, we just went through the planning process for crafting an interactive read aloud in the hopes of building empathy for characters that are different from ourselves, okay, different from our students. And again, the hope is that the more we do this, the more that we use these diverse texts in intentional ways, the more that our students will become more tolerant, more empathic individuals, and it will help to create and foster a more productive, warm classroom community. So, suggested next steps. It would be great practice for you to synthesize this collaborative planning work and fill out the lesson planning template. I think it will really help you to familiarize yourself with the structure of the interactive read aloud. So taking the work that we've just done and actually scripting it out into the interactive read aloud lesson planning template. Ask your principal or whoever's in charge of purchasing to purchase a copy of Watercress and other diverse titles. Teach the lesson to your class. So try it out, get right in there and see how it goes, see how your students respond and see how it feels for you. And then try making a goal. So how can you aim to teach one interactive read aloud focused on cultivating empathy a week? Okay. As a reminder, I am doing 4 different webinars on cultivating empathy through picture books. They're all planning sessions that are geared towards specific grade bands, but we know that text and books are not just really grade specific at all. So feel free to check any of these out. They probably will apply to the grade that you teach as well. And as always, feel free to contact me. So if you get really into this work and you're crafting these lesson plans and you want a second set of eyes to look them over, you can truly feel free to send that lesson plan to my email address listed and I can provide feedback on it. I'm just excited for you to dive into this work. So thank you so much for joining me today and feel free to be in touch.